And hello everyone. I can see Karen and Sheila, Marguerite. I never really pronounce names correctly, but I do try. And Christy, hello everyone. And I'm just going to finish assembling some of my stuff because I am forever just a little late. I say that, but I have kind of been preparing throughout the day. When it comes time to actually go live, everything kind of, flies off in every direction. All the stuff I prepared goes somewhere else, and I forget what time zone I'm in. So, but I am here. And I did remember to sharpen some charcoal, so that's good. And hello, Yvonne and Janice, Mary, Carolyn, Thomas, Brenda. Welcome, everyone. Cynthia. And the camera's actually in a good place for me to see what people are saying this time, so that's good. Let's see, what time is it? 6:59. It's almost 7. I'll wait for Sktchy to say go. Hello, I forgot to got the beginning of one. Hello from North Carolina. Hello from Nashville. Awesome. And if anyone's wondering where I am, I'm in Connecticut in the US. I'm very near New York, but very, very near New Haven, which has even better pizza. Is the audio okay? I think the video is okay because I can see the video, kind of, at least on my side. Hopefully it's not laggy or otherwise weird. You can go whenever you like. Don't need us to give you the signal. Okay. All right. Well, good, because I do have a lot I want to kind of talk about, and I do question my ability to get through all the stuff I want to talk about. So, the way I structured it at the end, I may not be able to do all the examples I wanted to get to, but that's why I kind of set them all up for the end. So hopefully we get to 3 out of 4 examples, maybe even all of them. All right, so welcome. I'm going to jump right into the first thing I wanted to discuss, which is design. So we're talking about hair today. I should mention that. That's important context here. We're talking about hair. Now, I have some printed images in front of me, and we're going to look at underdrawings and drawings I did and all the rest soon. But I think conceptually, it may help some people. Kind of helps me sometimes, although I usually do the same thing but with the underdrawing, to think about hair as a design element that exists beyond your technique, whatever it is you're using for the medium, any of that stuff. Just think of it as an actual design element and forget about the fact that you're looking at hair in the reference that already exists, already twists this way, already goes that way. I mean, most of the time I make use of what I see, but you don't have to. You really can run with whatever you have and use it to balance your composition in ways that you can't get away with everything else. If I take her nose and I stretch it to some absurd length, it's going to communicate something I probably don't want to. And if all I wanted to do was balance the composition, the nose was not a good choice, but the hair might be. So, an obvious example of that would be something like this. Now, everything here sweeps her over to the side. In drawing this, I would probably push the waist in a little bit here and have her kind of sway out more to give it more of a curve. But if I wasn't doing that, or for whatever reason, let's just say I wanted to, I could use the hair to correct the composition. Now, I didn't really think this through. Just, the idea here is that if I wanted to, I could ignore the hair she has, give her something else, and say, great, I just, made the design my own. And hair is a good way to do that because you can get away with all sorts of stuff. It's easier to do that with hair than it is a body part, at least for me, because my anatomy is not nearly as good as my understanding of ribbons and wires and simple things like that. Obviously, hair is not made out of ribbons and wires. Well, not usually. Okay, so other times in this design element phase, and I don't usually do this over this, but I'm doing it to kind of make a point, I guess. You can and should think about what's there, exaggerate it, find the chunks and all the rest before you actually start working on your piece, before you get past your underdrawing. You can think beforehand about all this stuff and say, I see now that this is a chunk that should survive on its own. This is going to be a broad sweep. this is going to recede more than I originally expected, and this is going to sweep all the way around the head. So this hair is going to go all the way up there. Now, I'm not going to figure some of that stuff out until I'm actually playing with it in the drawing. But if I'm really rigid, I'm going to miss out on some cool opportunities. So I do this kind of stuff in the underdrawing phase. I'm just showing you over the photo because it is, there's an opportunity with hair. And I think that most of the stuff, if someone looks at something I do and they say, I like the way you did the hair, maybe it's technique they're talking about. Sometimes they're just talking about design element stuff. And that exists independent of technique. You can do that with absolutely anything. Just stare at the photo and figure out what looks cool, figure out what you want to change, figure out what you could do. I mean, if I wanted to make this guy like crazy, you know, emo, I could have that hair go down there. I could give him some ridiculous mullet, you know. It's up to you, but hair is easy to play with. So you can just decide and then, you know, make it happen. You know, he has one crazy spike coming down there. Anything you want to do. You can probably pull it off with hair and not necessarily anything else. Over here, I added this one because I would definitely take the hair, bring it around here, and use that to, in my mind, balance the composition of it. So with hair, you can escape the boundaries of your reference photo more easily than you can with some other stuff. I hope that makes some sense. All right, so let's say you've designed something, you know what you kind of want to do, you do have a reference, you're working from it, or you're just, you know, paying attention to hair in general. You know, what do you look for? What do you exaggerate? What do you use to kind of pull off this hair thing? I think observation is super important with hair, and so I'm just going to point out some things that I have observed over time. And, you know, this is nothing, this is not going to be groundbreaking for anyone who's looked at hair. So, but it may be helpful. Hair turns away from light. This should be, you know, readily visible everywhere where you see hair here in the light, gradually moving away into darkness, right? So that, if this, you know, on my hand, which is really a terrible place to look at it, I guess, not because there's anything wrong with my hand, just it's not so contrasty. But here, as the hand turns away from the light, there's like a soft shadow, right? So it gets soft into darkness here. Soft, there you go, right there. So softly it moves into darkness, okay? So it turns away from the light, and I'm going to do something there in a second, but I'm jumping immediately to blocks light. Hair can also do what this pencil is doing and put a harsh shadow there. So a soft shadow, a hard shadow. That cast shadow is very hard. Hair is going to do both of those things. So here we see the hair turning away from the light, and I'm just going to very quickly express that over here. It's funny, I was just started doing there because it was like right in front of me, but I forgot where my light source was supposed to be. So let's just ignore that for a second, and we'll concentrate up here. All right, so let's say the light had nothing to do with that piece of hair. Sorry. I had to grab a different charcoal too. I'll relax in a minute, don't worry. We'll get there. All right, everyone. So here, this hair is this clump, this segment is sloping away from the light, and I'm going to indicate that while indicating texture at the same time, and then I'm going to gradually go up into the light, and then I'm going to use a little white to pull that up even further. Okay. I guess down here I'll just put a little shine on it just for fun. But it gradually turns away from the light, and down here, when you're blocking this light, let's say I had a segment here, I'm just going to indicate that very quickly, which I tend to do with texture. Okay, so I like making form with texture, so we have a strand up here, a little highlight there, some form with texture, and then down below we have another segment. Now, this hard shadow, I would actually, on the underdrawing, usually draw a little line like that, and I would just block it out completely. So this is the light actually, you know, occluding, I mean, the sort of form occluding light from the form below it. Those are totally different things. when I look at hair. So find the places where it turns away from the light, and that's something gradual, and that's where you make that transition. Find the places where the hair is blocking the rest of the hair, or a hand is blocking the light from the hair, whatever. It's a hard shadow, right? So if you find the difference between the soft shadows and the hard shadows, you'll, I think, be pretty far into the game. I think it goes a very long way. So depth, obviously you see hair passing below other strands, so one strand is above another, and you're indicating that with line or whatever you're doing with the paint. It depends on your technique, but you can also do it with some other things that may not come up right away for you, and that's weight of the line if you're using a pen, or just keep it lighter, put less shine on it, ignore it, add less detail, all these things. You basically just neglect and ignore things as they fall away back there. Now, the trick, though, is not in the rendering of it, let alone the very hasty rendering of it. The trick, I think, is in noticing it in the first place. If I don't, when I'm drawing this, notice that this section here is supposed to be far back, if I don't see that this here is really just turning away from me, if I don't see that this is, if I don't recognize that this is supposed to fall away from us, then I'm going to add all sorts of unnecessary detail. And you need to think about that beforehand, because once you start adding that detail, you're kind of stuck. And people sometimes throw detail everywhere in a piece because they didn't look first for the areas that are set back, that have that where they want to go portray this depth. So look first for things like depth. Detail is so easy and fun, but I think what's really important with detail is to first get the basic form of it. Once I know that the hair looks like that, right, more or less, right, then I can start throwing in the detail. Get the form first and then add the detail. In this case, I mean, I'm going to add very, very little detail, but I add it in the right place, I think. So some highlights right there. No highlights back there. But anyway, so that kind of makes it built out the form with just a little bit of detail, because I knew where the detail was supposed to go. But in order to do that, you have to first figure out the form, which I usually do with a good underdrawing, just cleaning it up a bit till I like the way it looks. Now, twists. This is a no-brainer. I'm mentioning this only because hair is supposed to be fun, and this brings into mind all that stuff I mentioned about design. It brings depth into it. It brings detail into it. It brings all of these concepts into play. We have the twists where it turns away from the light. You have places where it's blocking the light. All that stuff is reflected in these twists. So any of these twists that you can add, which does usually require you to think about it beforehand, or you'll miss the opportunity. It's a chance. It's a good opportunity to add some really cool, distracting sometimes design elements to your piece. So I definitely recommend looking for those twists. And when you're practicing hair, twists are a great way to do it, because, like I said, they use all these other observations. So. And hi, and any questions, please do ask. Hair is funny because we all know a lot about it, so many of you can pull it off better than I can. But I'm trying to find these things that most of us may take for granted and shine a light on them. Speaking of shining a light on them, so strays. Let's say this was hair towards the side of the side of the head, because that's a really good place to look for them, which you can see right there in that reference photo. They just sort of fly around. So there's a few kinds of strays that I recommend you look for. One would be the strays that come out of a clump, of a cluster, of a bundle. And you'll see those, and I usually indicate them with little lines like that. So just something dark coming off of the of the form. But then there are the lines that the strays that go wild, that go all the way out. And you'll find, at least I have, that you can kind of do whatever you want with them, and you can kind of add more than you think you can get away with, and they work. You can do them. I like to use, light colors whenever I can, because it's an excuse to do so. And I say an excuse to do so. Any place I can put light and have it not look clumsy, I like to do that. So just little lines here and there that stick out. It can make it look complex. If you do too many of them, it'll look messy, but it adds this little realistic element, I think. So I don't always work on tone paper, but it's definitely what I prefer, and it's easiest for me to express ideas, I think, when I'm working on tone paper. It's also just plain easier for me. So I usually use tone paper. The paper I use is Tone Tan by Strathmore. I don't think the cover's there. The cover is under here. So this stuff here, that's what I almost always use. They also have a multimedia version, and I use that sometimes too. Okay. So moving away from observation, so reference aids, this almost borders on silly, but I've used this many times. How do you keep from smearing the work? I always work from right to left, like that. So usually that's enough. And when it's not, I use a hand bridge. I made it out of some acrylic, but you can buy these, at Jerry's and some other places, things like this. And I can still see my work, and I can rest my hand on top of the work without ever smearing it. I use this all the time, but mostly working, left to right. And so for reference aids, in addition to obviously Sktchy, paying attention to the reference, anything you have around the house. I use this this yarn for braids all the time, and it's really not that detailed, but for twists and turns and things like that, just, be creative, look around the house, and don't be afraid to find things. There's just this paper alone. When it's twists, you have everything you need there for light and shadow, and you can move it around to get it exactly how you want it, take a picture of it, and then, actually use this in your drawings. For highlights, or even just to help you visualize the way highlights work, there's nothing quite like plastic wire. And I'm very serious about this. Plastic wire can teach you so much about highlights, because if you make a tangle of it, you can look at it and realize that every place that is at exactly the correct angle will shine that light right back in your eye, like a reflection. Just like if you were moving your cell phone around until you blinded somebody near you with some light you're catching in it. That's what's happening, and shiny black wire is great for that. So it can help with hair and just about anything else. Okay. Okay, so technique, and I'm not sure, I should keep track of the time. 7:16? Okay, no, we're making good time. All right, so I look at technique as just, like it says here, observation and problem solving applied to express your design. So you're using technique as the vehicle by which you express your design. Now, that means you've already thought about your design. You have some medium in mind, and you're trying to figure out how to do what you want to do in that medium. Scrap paper is your friend, obviously. A lot of this stuff happens over time, but as far as hair goes, I'm going to bring this piece out. One, because it's one of my favorite things that I've done, and two, because there's a lot of hair on here, and it's done in a ton of different mediums. The takeaway I think I'd like some of you to have here is that it doesn't really matter what you're doing. Doesn't really matter what medium you're using. You're observing the same stuff, and you're trying to express it in some way. So here, if I had the same design idea, right, which I did for all of this, right, the only thing that's varying, it's just the medium, right? So I'm using a different medium with each to express the same design idea. Okay, so what you see there in oil, that's how I handle the hair with oil while trying to express that one design idea. I hope that makes sense. If the design idea was crazy chaos and all the rest, or loose color, I would be doing something very different with oil, and I'd be doing something different with everything on this map. But I'm not. I'm trying to express the same design idea. So all I have to worry about with any one of these is simple problem solving. With pen, I'm indicating depth with value, right? And a lack of detail and contrast to draw the eye, all that stuff. It's just problem solving that I'm using to help me express the design that I have in mind. Okay? So that's especially important because I'm going to, do some demonstrations, and, with those, I can't cover every medium, and, things like oil paint and whatnot. It's probably not the best idea for me to try right now. But I just want you to know that it doesn't matter what medium you're using. You have to figure out how you can solve the problems. But in order to do that, you have to first figure out what you're actually trying to communicate. Okay, underdrawing. While I'm grabbing the charcoal here, before I put that down, I just want to mention that everything I do usually involves an underdrawing. So, here I think I'm just drawing the word 3 times. But each time I drew it, I think I got a little bit better at drawing the letters. Drawing letters? Yeah, okay. I think that's what it is. The point here is that if I jumped right into the charcoal, or the charcoal and the white, it would be really sloppy. It would look a lot more like the first one, and I wasn't trying to be sloppy. I was actually just trying to write the word underdrawing originally, and then I was like, well, let me do that again, and so I did it this way. The point here is that I always start with an underdrawing, and that is, for me, the design phase, where I can look at the hair and say, well, I don't want this to be so close to the head. I want to go further out. I want to accentuate, this section here. I'm going to have this area be mostly in light. All that stuff happens while I'm doing the underdrawing. And at some point, I move from something that's very loose to something that's tighter. So here, this is my loose stage. It looks like that. Here, this is a lot tighter. But I'll do this everywhere, if that makes sense. That's important because when you start off, I should have some scrap here because the more I think about it, here's a place where I messed up technique. A G instead of a Q, it happens. Okay, the reason I grabbed the scrap paper is because when I'm doing underdrawing and you're doing hair, this sloppy is probably where you want to be. At least it's where I want to be. So by staying that sloppy, I can move things around. I can say, no, this goes over here, that goes over there, and in the end, I'm just going to erase it. It doesn't matter. So I can go all over the place, or I can grab another paper. If I start slowing down too much, none of that design stuff will happen. But if I started out loose, then I can find in what I originally did my design. So that is what I do. And you can see that here. So there's a general shape, and then over here I started to identify some strands that I actually wanted to work on. And so it's still really, really loose. Really, loose is the wrong word, like messy. It is messy. But I can clean that up, and the degree to which I clean it up usually just depends on the medium I'm using, because that's a problem solving. I know that I'm working on charcoal, so I have to respect that. And in the case of charcoal, that means that I can't have too much underdrawing there, or it'll resist the charcoal. So I have to actually remove some of that. So I usually have this process that you see right now, where I eat away at the underdrawing and then build it back with some careful lines. I don't want to remove too much at once, or I'll forget what I actually had. Okay, and here, as I'm tightening this up, I realize this is an opportunity for a little twist. We put that little turn right there. Actually, we'll put a larger one there. Okay, but now it's too messy, so I'll remove some of that underdrawing. So if you ever wonder how I do the design phase, that's what it looks like. What you see right there is exactly what I do. And you'll find what works for you, but that's what I do. Okay, so I like that little curl right there. And we'll have it be kind of like a little cup shape. Okay. Now we're going to work on just that one little spot right now. We'll come back and do more depending on how much time we have, but I want to cover more ground. My charcoal pencils, I find that I have no choice, but even within a given grade, I have to divide them up into harder and softer. And then somewhere I have like super soft. And this is just among the hard grade. These are all the same grade, hard. They also make soft and all the rest, but these are all hard. They just vary that much. Or I'm that picky. I don't know. It's somewhere between those two things. In any case. So once I know how things look, or should look, once I have the design there, then I can go in with whatever medium I'm using, in this case charcoal, and start laying down some lines. Now, charcoal is a good thing, a good medium to use when discussing the technique I was talking about before, where I respect the form first and add the detail later. My charcoal technique is good for that because I actually like the line look. So I'm going, it's a little more stylized than some people use. So for me, that's a chance to emphasize the form. So you can see here that this is kind of liney, right? I haven't added gradients yet or anything like that. It's really just like line, line work. Okay. So that's a way that I've done some problem solving for this hair. I've done this style over and over, so I have an advantage here, but because I've already kind of like solved some of these design problems. I'm just sort of doing what I already know how to do, but still. Now, I'm ignoring, I'm making sure I don't fill up all of the toned paper, because if I do that, well, I'm kind of cheating myself, right? This work is already done. There's already a ton of toned paper here, and if I try to replace that value, I'm just wasting my time, right? Because this toned value is already here. I don't know why I'd want to add something else, so I need to leave as much of that toned value there as I possibly can. That saves me a lot of time. And so right here, I can leave all of that. As a charcoal and graphite the same thing? No. Graphite's graphite and charcoal is burnt something, as far as I know, right? Or maybe they just burn graphite? No, I don't know. No, they are different in terms of art materials. They are different. I actually don't know how they make charcoal other than with willow charcoal, where they literally burn willow. But I think they take some sort of material, it's organic, and then they compress it. And like, so when I say charcoal, a charcoal pencil that I'm using here is actually compressed charcoal. There's also carbon, which people sometimes refer to as charcoal pencils, but the carbon charcoal is way darker. In fact, if you're looking for like crazy cool darks, try this stuff. I hope you guys can actually see how insanely dark this is. I'll fill the area here. Okay. So carbon versus charcoal, and then versus graphite. This is a 6B, and it won't be anywhere near as dark as the others. So if you're looking for the tone tan technique that I use, you need charcoal. You can use carbon as well, but I find it's not forgiving enough because it's just too dark. But I leave the tone paper, and then I go back in now that I have the form. I'm going to do more to this, but before I do that, I reserve some of the highlights, especially in a piece like this where I know things are going to get lost. So I'm just going to put some basic highlights there. I kind of, and some of you have heard me say this before, I kind of treat highlights like currency. The more you have of it in the market, the less it's worth. So I try to respect the value of the currency as I work with it. So the less I have to use, the better, because what I do have that's highlighted will mean more. So okay, now that I have that and I have these lines, I can go back and add detail. Like I said, I don't want to lose the tone paper, but this is the point where I can go back in and add detail. I tend to put it in the shadow areas because I need them to be dark anyway, right? So if they're going to be dark, I may as well fill that with detail. So if you look at my drawings, you'll see that most of the detail in the hair is off in the shadows. It's like just killing two birds with one stone, basically. Oh, what is the white pencil? Yeah, it's funny. I take some of these things for granted sometimes. The because it's just like a part of my hand at this point. This is General's Charcoal White, which is the only one I really like. I've tried a lot of other things, you know, like Conte and other, you know, tools that are basically chalk, you know, like white pastel, but none of them do what I want them to do. Pastel pencils don't seem to do it. They're just not as opaque as the charcoal white. It does, however, crumble. Like if after you sharpen it and you go to use it the first time, it will crumble. But you know, you kind of get used to the way it crumbles and work around it, or just, you know, use it with a very light hand. This is very, very sharp and it's not crumbling for me. I sharpen on both sides though, so you can switch it around when things do crumble. Okay, it's just a very small segment, but I think you get the idea. Like that's how I do that. And so for her, she has very curly hair. I would do a few of those throughout, and then I would let the rest recede. In fact, if I was doing this, taking this all the way, I would probably use marker, but I'll show you that technique in a second. Oh, graphite is a minor mineral mixed with clay then baked. Charcoal is wood that is burned in a low oxygen environment. Awesome. Thank you very much. How do you seal your charcoal drawings? I generally don't. If I have to, I'll use a workable fixative, and I only use this if I need to. Krylon workable fixative is what I use, but I've used others. When I carry something around, like where is it? Like in this case, it's a notebook, right? So I'm carrying this notebook around, and as I do so, the stuff in it is going to get damaged. So I seal each one of these pages after I do them, after I finish them. That way they don't rub off like you see here. But if I didn't use fixative, it would be a lot worse. The reason I don't generally spray my work is because of the white. I don't know why, but the white will dull after I use the fixative on it. Not too much, and I could touch it up, but I don't want to, so I usually don't. The idea would be that they would be framed under glass. That said, most of my work, I've had it for a long time, and it just doesn't really rub off as long as you store it carefully. But it can. Definitely can. Let's see. Okay, so marker and charcoal. This isn't a technique I use often, so this may go poorly, but it's an interesting one, and I can probably do it quickly. So I just want to show you. Quickly is a relative term if I don't already have a marker out. Okay, so these are Copic markers, which are good for this. And this paper I'm using is not the same paper I was using a minute ago, even though the texture will look identical, and the tone is as well. This is the multimedia version of the Strathmore Tone Tan. You can't see it there, but it's a little thicker. Well, a lot thicker. Breaking up, so I mixed the fixative. Hopefully the stream is still good for others. I don't know, but I'm hoping so. The reason I'm highlighting this technique is because it drives home one of the points I hope I made in the tips, something that's been very useful for me, which is that you want the one to represent the many. So using marker, I'm just going to indicate the basic shape of her halo of hair, and I'll get more details soon. So I'm just going to block that in. I'm being messy with it. It really doesn't matter for what I'm doing. Okay. All the way like that. Okay, I'm using a Copic N1 for that. So this is very light. Once it dries in a moment, you'll see what I mean. It just sort of fades away. Oh, you're asking, I'm sorry, Sheila, I didn't realize you're asking which kind of fixative I use. For some reason I use it as a time marker. Yeah, the fixative, it's Krylon workable fixative. And it does the job. So this marker is pretty light. It kind of fades back into oblivion, and so I add a little more. And then in the darks, or in this case the places I imagine I'll probably need darks. Oh, the marker just ran. I hate that. Okay, so in the darker areas, which I will block in first, normally I take my time with things, but we're not doing that right now. Okay, so block in those darker areas, and now I'll show you why I'm doing this. Okay, I like to save time when I work on stuff because I lose interest, and when I lose interest in a piece, I generally lose it forever, and I've lost a lot of good work that way. So most things I do, I try to finish them up in one evening or two at the most. When I go longer than that, I start getting into some risky territory. So one way I try to cope with that is by finding any technique I possibly can that helps me save time. And with hair, one thing you definitely want to do to save time, and for some people like me to keep your interest steady, is to take shortcuts. Lots and lots of shortcuts. Wonderful shortcuts. And in this case, darkening the entire area, this takes longer, of course, to pull off well, but by darkening the mass there, I can indicate the lighter bits that are off towards not lighter bits, not really strays, but the bits that come up from the depths or are otherwise holding contrast, and then I can add just enough detail there so that they come forward, and then I'll add a little more darks, and before you know it, I've done an entire complicated head of hair without having to worry about every strand. So I think you can start to get the idea of how I'd be handling this if I switch, that one's too hard, to one of the softer charcoals, even though they're all the hard grade. This is a favorite paper, and I never thought to try markers with it. Yeah, it's really wonderful stuff. But bear in mind, this is the like Unhild said, this is the mixed media version of the Strathmore Tone Tan. This is what it looks like. Tone Tan, mixed media. Okay. If you use markers on the other one, it will kind of work, but the paper will, of course, do what you'd expect. It'll bunch up and all the rest. Now, if I wanted to, I could, do a bunch of this and, kind of move it in a way that to me indicates curls, but I'm aided by the blocking in below of marker. So this is all time-saving stuff. But I think that's super important with hair, finding ways to save time. The markers were Copic markers, but which are so it's an alcohol marker, but you can do it with other stuff. You can do it with Tombow. They work fine. Just keep it light. And here I would probably go back and add more dark marker rather than using the black there, and just keep pulling out some of the details. But let the few stand for the many is the point here. So, okay. And you can see all it is just some few strands standing for the rest. Okay. Next, let's see, how are we time-wise? And we're running late. Well, welcome. And hello to everyone that I haven't had a chance to say hello to yet. Once I started, I was kind of into it and was looking for questions, but didn't have a chance to say hi to everyone. Okay, wood in my mouth, and looking for, let's see, a 6B, an HB, and the underdrawing here. When I'm working graphite, I'm usually very careful, so this is a sketchier underdrawing than I normally would use, but I wanted to make sure I had it done in time. Craig, go! This is looking great. I'm glad you did. Hey, Benjamin. Yeah, and I only watched a portion of yours so far, so I feel I have tremendous guilt, but I will definitely finish it soon. Okay, so graphite, charcoal generally is my thing, so with graphite, I'm a lot more careful with it. So that's not reflected in this on the drawing because I usually go stay much more light. The reason I'm showing off what I do with graphite, because it's not usually my thing and I'm not an expert with it, is just to raise the point that I made, to emphasize the point that I made before, which is that you're trying to design something, right? And then you're trying to problem solve, to figure out a way to do what you're trying to do, what you're trying to express in the medium you've selected. So even if I don't use graphite all that often, I still have like an obligation to figure out what my design sense is for this piece, what I want to do, and how to make that happen. If you're not familiar with something, just grab scrap paper. And hair is a great way to test things. Just try it over and over and be like, oh, if I do that, it's great. If I add too much detail, it's no good. If I move too quickly, I can't go backwards. And, so that means with graphite, maybe I should take it slow. Do all that stuff on scrap paper. And hair is an awesome way to try things out, because I can't quickly draw a nose here. Well, I guess I can, but I'm no France. So try it with hair. Experiment. And in my case, what I do is nothing to buy Copic. Yeah, Copic markers are so expensive. So with graphite for me, let's see, I'll pick a section here. I guess this section here, that looks kind of cool. All right, so just like with charcoal, I find the form, and then I do what is kind of the logical thing, but I use strands to help me find to develop the form, I guess you could say. I do that with charcoal, and I do that with graphite. I do that with pretty much anything where I can get away with it, because by doing that I can kind of see that this goes all the way over there. If I was up here, I would use the strands as I follow them with something light, because I don't want to commit. I get a better sense of the form by following them all the way through around a corner. So never is that quite as true as it is with graphite, because I usually use something light like a 3H to feel out the form first. Then I move up. This is, especially in this paper, a lot darker, and this gets into chunking. So here I made a little subdivision right there without even meaning to, and I do that over and over as I work. I just did it again. See what I mean? I split this up into sections as I worked on it without meaning to, if that makes sense. I guess you just sort of get used to that, at least I have, and it's super important because it adds variety and, for me, breaks up what otherwise would be two illustrative kind of clumps. Anyway, so once I've identified one of those clumps, I tend to see between here and here is a cluster and a section, and I'm going to darken that whole thing so that it kind of recedes. And I moved over to the 6B without even realizing I was doing it. And because I had a section here and a section here, now I can separate this one. This piece is entirely separate from that one, part of the clump, but this goes behind that one. Graphite is a good way, for me, like a good medium for exploring that kind of stuff, because you can make many, many strokes and do it fairly lightly, and then find the form as you go, whereas I have to plan a little bit more ahead of time with charcoal. So like I said, you find ways to solve problems, and along the way, sometimes you find something that some other medium lets you do, affords you, that you're not going to get with another. In the case of graphite, I can sort of explore the design as I work on it. So, okay, now I want to emphasize some of the darks here because I'm not paying enough attention to that now that I have the form. So I'm going to take the 6B and just build up some layers very quickly. Other people do this part better than I do it, but but I'm doing it anyway. Okay, Now, some of the things we talked about before, the soft shadow and the hard shadow, I have an opportunity here because I have this section of hair passing above to add a hard shadow. So right here, I'm going to decide that hard stopple here. Notice I'm not just making a straight line across. I'm curving the line because I'm respecting the volume. Hair is all about, you know, mass and volume and moving these things around and thinking about them in the real world, or even modeling them if you can't see it. And so whenever you can, indicate that form and volume even on each individual section. So these sections move back where the light is hitting here, then it'd be hitting here, then it'd be hitting here, then it'd be hitting there. So you kind of stagger them backwards, and this is all dark. I emphasize that line more than I normally would, but it's there to illustrate a point. Okay, so I can have that hard shadow, that cast shadow from the hair above it. And then down here, I have a soft shadow as it turns away from the light. And because it's graphite, I had to reserve the highlights. But I'm, you know, not much for actually following through on the highlight reservation, so I use an eraser when I need to. How many hours are drawing? It looks time consuming. Yeah. I don't know. To me, I think of myself as someone that gets tired of drawings very quickly. They go very fast for me, but you know, most of them between 6 and 12 hours. But if it's like a 5x7 charcoal tone tan, I can probably do it in an hour and a half or 2 hours sometimes. So it depends. So this is a mechanical, an electric eraser. This little thing at the end spins there. This is a little portable version. I do have a ridiculous larger studio version, which has more oomph, and this thing is kind of great. In fact, I'll use this thing. Oh wait, the tip is dirty. I don't want to mess with that. It has Conte on it. Okay. Can't watch this later. Yeah, your hair is really fun. Okay, so I'm going to use this to pull out some of the light. It's not the most precise tool, but I can go back over and add detail wherever I lost it. Okay, so I'm just going to grab those two spots there. I would normally spend more time being a little bit more precise, but you get the idea. Add a few strands, just because I like texture. And we talked about strays before, so let's add a couple strays, and I'll put there like that. You can do whatever you want with strays. You can go crazy with strays. You can have strays that are really a little clump of hair, like a little cluster. That's like a stray cluster, you know, all that kind of stuff. This shadow's a little too harsh there, so I'm just gonna break that up a bit. I'm gonna use a kneaded eraser. And yeah, as far as where you can get the electric eraser, you can definitely get them at Amazon. Dick Blick, Jerry's. They're one of those products that are around, but you don't really notice them sometimes. But once you see them, you'll realize they're kind of all over the place. Because like Staples sometimes even has them, and it's a bit of a surprise, but they do. Okay, so I'm gonna jump from graphite. What time is it? 7:47. Let's be super ridiculous ambitious, and we're going to jump from here to watercolor. And so I have a messy underdrawing here, and there's nothing that's really different about the technique I'm going to show you here than any of the other stuff that I did. But I'm playing with watercolor here just because I think that, at least for me, it's been an opportunity to get to know hair. Wait, this one's too fine. What is that? There's only 0.1. 1 second. 3. I don't want any of those. I want my carbon black. Where did you go? Oh. I actually set all the watercolor stuff aside for myself in this nice little tin. See how caring and kind I was to myself. And then I forgot where it was. This guy is great. It got it from Amazon, but it's a carbon platinum fountain pen. It's not very expressive, but it seems to go over any surface without failing me. So it's a really dependable pen. So I love to use it, and it's also, in my mind, the perfect width. Okay. So pen is not the best for feeling out the hair. You really do want to have the underdrawing done beforehand. If you're using pen to make lines you're going to want to show off later, at least for me. But it's actually when I was using pen early on that I started to think about hair in a new way. So I thought it'd be nice to talk about that, because I was doing pen and ink stuff, and once I started trying to do some, apply that to portraits, I realized that, it's very difficult to do pen and ink stuff when you're, when you don't know what you're doing with portraits, but very easy to apply it to hair, right? Platinum carbon ink is incredible. Yeah, it is. So I found that it was very easy for me to apply that pen and ink sort of, hatching technique to hair. And once you have the ink down, you can't really go wrong, right? It's there, you're good. It's like you have a coloring book at that point. So I was able to move past a lot of my reservations, and especially when working with color and whatnot, I could just sort of go crazy once I had that down. So I found new ways to solve the same old problems, the same things that I observed, just like you would have observed the things that we were talking about before with hair. You observe them, and you find ways to solve those problems and to find ways to express them with some other medium. So once I did that process with pen and ink, I found myself able to apply it to things like charcoal. So there was a direct line for me from pen and ink into charcoal, like a straight line, if that even exists with art. And by the way, one thing that's really fun to do. Sorry, my as I stopped speaking for a second, my brain shut off while I was trying to draw a line. One thing that's fun to do is if you go to draw a line, right, and I worry sometimes like, well, oh my God, will I meet the line where it's supposed to go? Will it be great? One thing that's cool is if you don't like what you do, you can always, with hair, decide to make it just a little wider, like I just did. So, and add just another element. It's all kind of legit. So. Hair can be very, very forgiving. I know people get worried about hair, but I think it's such an opportunity to just sort of relax and have fun. Okay, so I gotta hurry. So I would do something like that, but I do it all over the place. Indicate some shadow with it, indicate the form, learn about hair by following the lines, find myself realizing that the end product usually looks better than the individual lines do, which was also an important lesson, and somehow that helped me relax. But so with hair, and I won't really have time to do much of this, but what are you doing with your left hand supporting? Oh, guiding my right hand? Yeah, when I use both hands to draw lines, I don't even realize I'm doing it most of the time. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I support it. It keeps my hand steady. If you look at my drawings and think, oh, you must have a steady hand, well, sometimes I do, but watch me turn my hand. See it? My hand is very shaky. It shakes as I move it, so I keep it steady with one hand like that. So, what's the best way to render long ringlets? Like long curves? It's the underdrawing. For me at least, you get them done in the underdrawing, and then solve the problem with whatever medium you're using, if that makes sense. If you mean ringlets like the truly curvy, curly time, then I recommend using the one to represent the many tip, where you're using just a bit to represent the rest. So in the case of this, it's just at this point, once I have that down, it is really nothing but a coloring book. So I can have as much fun with it as I want. and just sort of avoid the highlights. And if I wanted to, just go crazy and add some blue, crazy relative term for me, because I don't know if you guys notice my work, but I tend to be shy when it comes to color. But pen and ink is super fun. Do what you want with it. It's definitely like a coloring book, and it lets you explore the ways in which hair work. And because I usually fail to respect the highlights, at some point I lose them most of the time, I use either a masking pen, because it works so well beforehand, or I use a Posca white afterwards, although I don't see it around, so because I want to hold something up and I don't see my Posca, if I don't have a Posca, or I don't want to use it, or I want to use a brush, white wash is amazing. You can use it to cover pretty much anything. It'll stick to just about everything and solve a lot of problems for you. You can see white gouache, anywhere here where I was having problems. So, like, I think definitely down in the watercolor section, not on the oil, but on top of the colored pencil, I use a little gouache. Great way to get highlights. What brand of watercolor? I use all Daniel Smith, Holbein, and Winsor & Newton, so somewhere between the three of them. And then I make little magnetic palettes, magnetic half pans, and then I stick them here like that. That way I can move them around and all that. Okay, so, all right, I do have a few last things I want to say. Usually I'm more comfortable being loose in my work. Is there a way to do hair well in a loose way? Yeah, absolutely. I tighten things up, but I really think that the right way to do it is to start very loose and then tighten up only as far as you want to tighten it up. So, you start off with, if you wanted to, like when I start off, if I start off and I have something very, very loose, and I know that this is the general, so the hair goes like that, right? I have all the options here. I can do whatever I want now. If I want to keep it loose, that's great. If I want to tighten it up, I can. So I think I hope that kind of answers the question. If at this point all I wanted to do was add some marker and nothing else, like, great, I'm done. If I did that and then I realized I want to make it tighter, then I could, I can start adding charcoal. Just tighten it up as I go, but only go as far with that as I want to. Same applies to watercolor or any of the rest. So for me, once I have the underdrawing down, it's all about choices after that. So loose or tight, I don't think it matters. I think, yeah, you definitely have options. So like that was, for me, like that was very loose, and I could do a whole piece in that style, and it would go very quickly, actually. But I tend to tighten things up because I do enjoy that a lot. There. I was going to then go through and point out some work by some other amazing artists, but it's 7:57, so we may not have time. I will just mention that on Sktchy, there are so many artists that do all of this stuff better than I do. And I do mean that. Everyone's different, but if you look around, you'll find people doing things that I wouldn't even talk about today, like what Christina does with hair and color. It's incredible. I can't do it. Someday maybe, but right now I don't have that. So there's some things I can't teach you, but I know that if you go around Sktchy, you're going to find some of this amazing work out there. Like look at the way Robin Yang is solving color and depth and volume and where should the detail be, all that other stuff. He's solving these things, and you can see it there in his work. No matter what medium he uses, you'll see that. So look around. Kelly's Art Deli. Her hair is absolutely incredible. Hair as a design element, you couldn't ask for a better example than that. So definitely look around. And yeah, I think that's all the time we have. So. Thank you, everyone. I just want to stress the fun portion. Have fun. It is so important. The more you have fun, the more you'll do it, the more art you'll make, and the more art you make, the better you'll get. So please do try to have fun with it. Thanks, everyone.